You're listening to a Roddenberry Podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry Podcast.
Episode 68. Episode in Bathurst. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Ashley Thomas.
And I'm Earl Green. Each week on Gene-ology, we examine the early TV writing of Gene Roddenberry, looking for signs of the morals, meanings, and messages that were part and parcel of his most famous later work, Star Trek.
This week, our quest for those messages takes us to a land down under for the premiere episode of the Peter Graves series, Whiplash, for which Gene wrote 4 episodes.
Before we get to trivia on this week's episode, let me take a brief moment to encourage you to join our Patreon or follow us on YouTube, or leave a review wherever you are listening to us. Patreon is your gateway to all things Mission Log, including exclusive access to the unedited version of our show and our private Discord where you can interact with us, your hosts, during scheduled live chats along with occasional screenings. You can access all this for just $1 a month, so head over to patreon.com/missionlog to see what tier works for you and join the conversation.
By the way, reviews help our shows more than you know. Even if you can't come up with the words for a written review, just giving us a 5-star rating really goes a long way to tell the algorithm that you like us, you love us, you want some more of us, and that other people might like us too. We are counting on our loyal genealogists to help us spread the word. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, please take a crack at the trivia today.
I am going to try to whip it, and whip it good. Because we're no longer in icky whip-based episodes of Wrangler. Welcome to Whiplash. And welcome to Gene's first work for a studio outside of the United States. Whiplash, based on the real historical character of Freeman Cobb, but taking some significant liberties in fictionalizing his life, was produced by ITC Entertainment, co-founded by Lew Grade in the 1950s in the UK. Grade had tried to get in on the independent TV action in the UK when commercial broadcasting began there, which is a whole saga that would take its own entire podcast to sort out. But he was shut out for fear that he already had too much influence over the British entertainment industry. ITC eventually joined forces with one of the UK's regional commercial broadcasters, ATV, which on its own had enough money to either broadcast shows or make them. Grade's solution? He would make the shows, ATV would air them, and Grade would also retain the rights to shop these shows to overseas broadcasters. Every Jerry Anderson production up through the 1970s owed its existence to ITC, as did Danger Man, The Saint, starring Roger Moore, The Persuaders, starring Roger Moore and Tony Curtis, and even The Muppet Show. In order to make his productions attractive to the well-funded and hungry American TV market, Grade was making shows on film, in color, before color television was even a widespread thing in Britain. ITC also had its hands in the movie market, with the early Muppet movies, The Dark Crystal, Return of the Pink Panther, The Last Unicorn, Raise the Titanic, and many more. Since Lew Grade was trying to create programming that would be syndicated to North America, he frequently courted American talent to lend these shows some authenticity. See also why Martin Landau and Barbara Bain, the husband and wife team who became stars in the early seasons of Mission Impossible, were courted to star in Space 1999. And among the American writers Grade tried to bring into the fold was one Gene Roddenberry, who was currently contractually tied down to his long-term development deal at Screen Gems. But Gene had wisely negotiated his Screen Gems contract so that it wasn't exclusive, so he could still write freelance on the side, and this is how Gene came to work for ITC and Lew Grade. Grade, and specifically his right-hand man Ralph Smart, began trying to lure Gene to the UK permanently to develop shows for ITC, dangling the carrot that someday Gene could start his own production company under the ITC umbrella. By all accounts, including his official biography, Gene had no intention of relocating to the UK and instead played both sides against the middle, using ITC's interest in him to convince Screen Gems he was hot property, which in turn led to Screen Gems extending his development deal and sweetening the pot. But Gene did write 4 episodes of Whiplash, which was filmed over 1959 and 60 in Australia, with post-production handled not locally, but at ITC's home base in the UK. The show premiered in 1960 in the UK on ATV, but ironically, Australia had to wait until 1961 for ATN 7 in Sydney to air a show made in its own country. Though Episode in Bathurst was the second episode produced after what is said to have been a very troubled start of production in 1959, in broadcast order, depending on where you were, it was either the series premiere or it was Episode 6, though Gene was a hired hand in the scriptwriting department and can thus not claim to have created the series. These scripts predate Wrangler, but the series itself didn't see the light of day until after Wrangler's own short and troubled run had ended. Peter Graves starred in Whiplash as Chris Cobb, a very, very fictionalized version of Freeman Cobb, an American who did indeed establish the real Cobb and Company stagecoach line out of Victoria in 1853 during Australia's gold rush, though its headquarters did relocate to Bathurst, New South Wales, when the gold mines became central to its business model. Peter Graves was already an international star before Whiplash premiered, thanks to his previous Western series, Fury, which had aired on NBC from 1955 through early 1960, and was co-produced by ITC Productions and had been broadcast to great acclaim in the UK as well. Starring in westerns was kind of the family business. Peter's older brother was James Arness, the star of Gunsmoke. Peter's starring role as Jim Phelps, head of the top secret espionage organization known as the Impossible Missions Force in Mission Impossible, were several years away, and would happen on the sound stages on the Desilu lot next to where Star Trek was being filmed at the same time. Peter did not join the Mission Impossible cast until that show's second season premiered in 1967. Of course, he appeared in 1980's Airplane, where he seasoned his customary serious performance with impeccably straight-faced comic timing, and also starred in the 80s revival of Mission Impossible, which, ironically, filmed in Australia in an attempt to outrun the 1988 Writers Guild of America strike. In the 90s, Graves became the face and voice of A&E's biography series, which is itself a little ironic as this concludes our Peter Graves biography. We lost Peter in 2010. Joe McCormick as Matt Denvers is actually an Australian doing a passable American accent here. Just a year earlier, he was host of his own daytime variety series, and he appeared in 2 more episodes of Whiplash, though as a different character each time, and with his native accent. He was also a prolific director in the early days of Australian television behind the camera for numerous episodes of The Magic Boomerang and Adventures of the Sea Spray. He also directed the 1966 movie musical Funny Things Happen Down Under, which happened to be the big screen debut of one Olivia Newton-John. You know who else Joe directed? British actor Geoffrey King, who guest stars here as Postmaster Thomas Perkins, who later went on to guest star in The Magic Boomerang. This episode marks a very early career appearance for actor George Rubacek, who was born not in Australia, but in Vienna, Austria, to be precise. He would go on to appear in another episode of Whiplash, but not as Tim Perkins, and from there he was a mainstay of British TV, with appearances in The Saint, Doctor Who, The Avengers, and Department S. He's been seen many a time in the movies, too, with roles in 2 James Bond films, You Only Live Twice and The Spy Who Loved Me, as well as The Dirty Dozen, Dad's Army, and an uncredited background part in a little movie called Star Wars. In the 1980s, George found a second line of work adapting the English scripts for anime, including several Lupin III movies. The director of this episode was Peter Maxwell. Another Austrian native, he directed a lot of TV on both sides of the Atlantic. The Adventures of Sir Lancelot, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Errol Flynn Theatre, William Tell, the late 50s TV version of The Invisible Man, and then he went to Australia where he directed 18 episodes of Whiplash's 34-episode run, so a little over half the entire series. And Australia is where he stayed, directing more TV, including Riptide, Skippy, Barrier Reef, Class of 74, and A Country Practice, and it was in Australia that Peter Maxwell died in 2013. And finally, there's a really familiar name as the associate producer of Whiplash if you're a Star Trek fan, John Meredith Lucas. He was aboard for the entire run of this series as an associate producer, and he had already displayed his writing chops on shows like Dragnet and Zorro. He was also a director into the bargain and had been behind the camera for episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Thin Man, and Zorro, and he would direct 13 episodes of Whiplash as well, just not this one. He would work with Gene again, serving as producer for the middle stretch of Star Trek's second season and writing 4 episodes in the second and third seasons, and directing 3 of those. In one case, Elan of Troyes, John Meredith Lucas was the writer and director. He also wrote an unproduced 2-part script, Kitumba, for the 1970 Star Trek TV revival that never was. He went on to write scripts for The Starlost, Mannix, Logan's Run, and The $6 Million Man, and he directed episodes of The Fugitive, Night Gallery, Planet of the Apes, and The $6 Million Man, and produced the painfully short run of the 1980 series Beyond Westworld. We lost John Meredith Lucas in 2002. One last note, because it's the question we get most often: can this show be seen anywhere? Yes. Whiplash has been released as a complete series DVD box set both in the UK by the much-missed Network label and in the US by Timeless Media Group. Both sets are still readily and fairly inexpensively available. At the time of this recording, it's also streaming on several Roku channels.
There's not a man in town who's willing to stand up against these Denvers. Some even pretend to admire them. Thank you. All right. There are a lot of fawning, toadying fools who actually believe they're buying protection of some sort.
One thing I don't quite understand: if these men were such top guns in the States, what are they doing here? Why leave an established reputation?
We've all seen them draw, Mr. Cobb. No doubt about their speed. There. I had a lot of trouble getting this for you.
What do you mean?
Your gun and holster.
What for?
You're an American. You're the only one who can stop them.
Being an American doesn't make me any more of a quick-draw artist than you are. Mr. Perkins, one of the things I liked best about Australia when I first came here was the fact you didn't have to wear a piece of iron to prove you were a man.
But you can't go unarmed, Mr. Cobb. They'll provoke you into a fight. That's their method.
Wearing one of these won't help any.
Look, Mr. Cobb, we're in trouble. Some folks see a lot of glamour in this fast draw thing.
That's my point. Sure, I could strap this on, go out on the street, maybe I can even beat the Denvers. But you know what'll happen the next day? Every man in town will be wearing one of these. It's ugly and stupid and vicious, Mr. Perkins. But it could catch on.
Yes, I know. You must have seen my boy Tim down by the toll gate.
That's exactly my point.
What are we going to do?
I don't know yet. I do know that this is not the answer. I only hope there is one.
Australia, the land down under whose history parallels the American West, home of the Aborigines, the trackless bush, the empty desert, a land where in 1840 an American, Christopher Cobb, came to establish a stage line and lived to become a legend. Act 1. Stop me if you've heard this one. 3 guys walk into a bar, but this bar is in the town of Bathurst on the Australian frontier in the 1840s, and these 3 guys have nothing but bad intentions. Meet the Denvers brothers from America. They're here because, well, frankly, they got chased out of their hometown for being bad news. They size up the room, and there's not a gun in sight. A pity they're here to cause some trouble. Oh, wait, there's one guy at the bar with a drink in his hand and a gun tucked into his belt. Matt Denvers, the eldest of the brothers, says the man's too much of a coward to use it. But hey, let's draw right here and now if you want to prove otherwise. The results are quick and tragically predictable. Since the man at the bar already had a few drinks in him, he's a dead man. Turns out there's another armed patron at the bar, but when he pulls his gun on Matt, Tiny Denvers drops him with one quick shot. And Matt says, well, that was just self-defense. The Denvers brothers are here to set up shop, make themselves at home, and take over the town. We'll look after all you fine folks here, so long as we get a healthy cut of whatever money comes into this town. Let's have a unanimous vote. Anyone who objects to this plan, just step forward and we'll repeat this whole quick draw routine to see who wins. Oh, and Matt Denvers decides drinks are on the house. The bartender starts to protest, but in the end, he doesn't want to wind up with a belly full of lead. And just like that, the Denvers brothers are in charge in Bathurst. Welcome to Cobb & Company HQ, where Chris Cobb operates Australia's first stagecoach service, ferrying workers and mail to and from the coal towns, and any other kind of passengers or cargo requiring regular service. One of his coach drivers is back early, though. Bathurst has put a barbed wire gate across the road and is charging a toll to get through, which, since he was carrying the mail, is all kinds of illegal. In fact, the driver says, the town is under new management, 3 brothers by the name of Denvers, and they won't let anyone into or out of town without paying a toll. That's all Chris Cobb needs to hear. He wants his horse saddled up and ready to go so he can go investigate what's going on in Bathurst, since it's likely that everyone there is too scared to summon outside help. Cobb's driver is a bit worried. You can't face 3 gunslingers from Texas by yourself. But Cobb says they wouldn't have left Texas if they hadn't been chased out, and if they were chased out of Texas, they can be chased out of Australia too. Back in Bathurst, business is booming, as long as your name is Denvers and you're manning the toll gate. And right up to that gate rides Cobb on his horse. Whoa there, buddy, that'll be 4 shillings to get into town. But Tim, the local kid who's been hired to help watch the gate, recognizes Cobb and points out that he runs the stage line. Tiny Denvers smiles. Oh, he's probably here to talk business then. Let him in for free. Cobb's first stop is the post office, where Tim's father is the postmaster. He's got a package for Cobb just arrived from the States. It's Cobb's gun and holster. And with these 3 Texan outcasts running a protection racket, Cobb's going to need it. Cobb lets out a world-weary sigh. One of the reasons he moved down under in the first place was to get away from a world where a man has to constantly wear a gun on his hip just to prove he's a man. And if he tries to open some sort of civilized negotiation to end this racket, wearing a gun won't necessarily help. It'll just be a provocation for more trouble. Worse yet, if he were to beat the Denvers at their own game, every man in town will suddenly be packing. How does that make things better? Cobb leaves his gun at the post office. He wants to talk his way out of this, not shoot his way out. Cobb walks into the bar and kicks back for a little bit of people watching. A friendly game of cards goes to hell pretty quickly, and Cobb intervenes to keep Matt Denvers from shooting a man he is accused of cheating. In front of nearly the entire town, Cobb wants to know what a big shot like Denvers is doing 5,000 miles from home. When challenged, Denvers instinctively reaches for his holster, but Cobb has something to say about that too. Why is it always about the gun? Are you such a small man that you can't settle anything without a gun? Tiny Denvers offers Cobb his gun. You're going to need it if you keep talking like that. But he refuses, pointing out that murderers are hanged in Australia just like they are in the States. Matt Denvers starts shooting at Cobb's feet. Let's see you dance, buddy. But Cobb stays still until Tiny finally takes a swing at him. And well, hey, now here is something Cobb can do. After a quick dust-up, Tiny is on the floor with a mouthful of dirt, and by the time Tiny reaches for his gun, Cobb kicks it out of his reach. Thanks for the dance. I'm out of here. Cobb strides out of the bar, having shown up the brothers. His work is done. Well, kind of. Tiny grabs his gun and follows him out of the bar, firing, but he empties his 6-shooter into thin air. Cobb heads for the safety of the Bathurst office of Cobb & Company, with Tiny in hot pursuit, reloading. Tiny shoots out the windows, expecting Cobb to go for a gun, but instead Cobb grabs a boomerang and lobs it at Tiny's head. That's one Denvers brother down, permanently. On the upside, hey, at least no one shot him. Act 2. In the morning, Cobb addresses a gathering of the townsfolk. There is a way to solve this without arming the whole town, because he who lives by the gun stands a pretty good chance of dying by the gun, too. Tim Perkins, the hot-blooded kid who the Denvers have hired to help watch the gate, says that the Denvers are the new law in town, and he's ready to go for his own gun to prove it. But Cobb has a different suggestion if Tim's in a big hurry to prove what a manly man he is. How about a good old-fashioned knife fight with his hand and Tim's hand tied together? But before anyone can go all West Side Story, Tim backs down. He really doesn't have the guts to just stab a guy, and he finally admits he doesn't really want to shoot anybody either. He'd rather help Cobb chase the Denvers out of town and get things back the way they were. Cobb simply says he'll be in his office. All he needs Tim to do is find out where Matt and Pecos Denvers are. And where else would they be but the saloon? Cobb stands outside the saloon unarmed. Well, unless you count his bullwhip. He shouts a challenge to the two surviving Denvers brothers. As the brothers walk out into the street to meet Cobb, everyone else in town takes shelter. As a wise man once sang, "There's gonna be a showdown." Cobb disarms Matt Denvers with a crack of his whip and then challenges him to pick up his gun. But another crack of Cobb's whip sends the gun flying before Denvers can lunge for it. For an encore, Cobb bets he can make Denvers do a dance in the middle of the street without firing a single shot. And this he does. Pecos Denvers, in the meantime, doesn't take kindly to his older brother being humiliated in front of the whole town, but the one thing stopping him is Tim Perkins, the postmaster's son, staring him down with his hand on his own gun. Before Pecos can draw, the postmaster quietly sneaks up and disarms Pecos, and the patrons from the bar are backing him out into the street. For some reason, the Denvers brothers suddenly don't seem quite so welcome anymore. Using nothing but his whip, Cobb sends Pecos Denvers dancing out of town too. In fact, the people of the town won't even charge the Denvers to leave. They can get out of here for free and never come back. As everyone walks down to dismantle the Denvers toll gate, they trample something carelessly dropped in the dusty road. An empty holster. The end.
Well, Earl, I can safely say that you whipped the trivia and recap into shape, my friend. Well done.
I certainly tried. It's delightful being able to watch something again.
Yeah, that's I am a painfully slow reader to have 2 English degrees. So the watching is very nice. Very appreciative.
Well, and sometimes I feel like just script coverage, if that's all we've got, it's really hard to kind of make that come alive.
Right.
Especially if, like, the last episode-specific thing we did on this podcast was a script that didn't even get made, so there's literally no visual element to talk about.
Right.
And it's just, you just have to tow it out of the swamp with a rope, and sometimes it just feels like Artax. Oh, too soon.
Oh, too soon. Too soon.
But never too soon for a chuckle, and I really like this. I feel like this is a sign that this show was being made for the local audience and not necessarily for the U.S. audience. Texas? That's in the United States.
Yeah.
And Peter Graves just says straight-faced, "Yes, I know." That felt so much like something out of Airplane that I just started laughing out loud.
When I was watching this last night with Mr. Nerdy Blogger, he got a big kick out of the line, "Texans never leave Texas." Which, as someone with family in Texas, yes.
Yeah.
And all the things you hear about Texas, everything's bigger in Texas, it's true. Also, Texans are extremely proud of being from Texas. Gene was a Texan, was he not?
He was born in El Paso.
He was born in El Paso, so he would know a little thing or two about Texans.
Yeah. Now, that being said, the family did not stay in El Paso very long. They were the Texans who left Texas. So that's funny that Gene's the one writing this. Texans never
right.
Tell us another one, Gene. Tell us another one.
Well, apparently nobody ever leaves Maryville, Tennessee, either, and me and one other cousin did, and for the longest time we were asked when we were going to move back. We've said it already in the VAM, Earl, but just so it's said on this show, theme song. The music for this series so far, absolute knockout. Bangers. Straight bangers the whole way.
Yeah, the theme song for this show slaps.
Really does.
And
really does.
It's really very handy because it's telling you the background of the story.
It does. And I was also enjoying the fact that the episode opens with like a little bit of like background information just right there on the screen, like, this is the historical context for this. This is based on a real person. I'm like, oh, cool.
Yeah. And that text appears at the beginning of Act 1 after the credits. That's what I read for the story setup before Act 1 this week. It's like, oh, thanks, Gene.
Hey.
It's about time you lent me a little bit of a hand here, buddy.
Yeah, appreciate that.
The filming location of the town, that is a great location.
Yeah.
And I was really curious because in the end credits, it says this: town site courtesy of the Savoy Corporation Limited, Sydney. So it is entirely possible that the location work was done in what was either in 1959 or what had once been a real-life company town. In other words, you work for us here, you live here. The moment you don't work for us here anymore, get out.
Yeah.
I tried
Gotta make space.
Yeah, I tried to look up the Savoy Corporation and didn't find much except for a business listing in New South Wales dating back to 1934 that seemed to cross over into multiple industries. Multiple really unrelated industries at that. So, was this a former company town of theirs to which they still technically held the deed? I will be continuing to try to dig into that because that's the sort of stuff that tickles my trivia fancy. And I'm sorry, this is turning into Trivia 2, Trivial Boogaloo.
No, I'm here for it, Earl. I think this is it's good, especially, we're starting a brand new series. I would wager that most folks probably haven't seen this, so good to have the context. I think that's really interesting. I think aside from Airplane, I don't know that I've really seen Peter Graves in anything. So this is kind of my introduction to him, and I really like him. Like, I don't know anything about this character of Chris Cobb, but I'm like, hey, this guy seems cool. Like, we'll get into more of this in discussion and, morals, meanings, messages, but this is a very, and again, this may be different based on if we're watching episodes not written by Gene, but having this one being the only one I've seen, this is a very, like, Kirk-type character without as much bravado.
Yeah, I like the world weariness at anything involving a gun.
Yes.
This just kind of begs for some kind of flashback episode that shows, what caused him to leave the States. Because, he's talking about the Denver's brothers. Oh, they wouldn't leave without a reason. Buddy, you wouldn't leave without a reason either. What was the reason?
Yeah, it's like, what was your reason, bro?
So I wonder if such an episode was ever made. And the other thing about Peter Graves is this guy popped out of the womb doing the Silver Fox thing. How dare you, sir, making the rest of us look bad. Now, as for where Whiplash was filmed, indoors, the studio filming took place at Sydney's Artranza Park Film Studios, which, when I read that, a synapse fired somewhere back here. It's kind of painful, because I remembered seeing that name somewhere before. And then I looked up what all had been shot there, and I realized why. This is also where the 1970 sci-fi series Phoenix 5 was filmed. But for more on that, I direct you to the May 10th, 2022 episode of Roddenberry's Sci-Fi 5 podcast to hear about a show that was like Star Trek and Fireball XL5 had a baby with an Australian accent.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I remember that episode now. Okay.
And another slapping theme song, by the way, now that I think of it.
A very silly thought occurred to me while I'm watching this episode, Earl. I believe you're probably familiar with the phrase, Americans will measure with anything except the metric system.
Yes.
One of my favorite things in this episode is that Chris Cobb will fight with anything except a gun. It was the same principle.
Killed somebody with a boomerang.
Yeah. Like, I mean, one, how Australian can you get? Two, and he's not even Australian. But, even when he enters the bar and he starts to face off with the Denvers, and the guy, takes a swing, and he's like, nah, bro.
Yeah.
And he disarms him, and then, lands several punches and knocks him down. He's like, we're not doing this today.
Yeah, I like that. I wonder how much of that is to do with what was acceptable to show in the UK and Australia versus what would have been in an American Western.
Well, that's true. We still got lots of gunfire in this episode, though.
The fact that the star of our show is strenuously avoiding doing the same, like he goes to the office of Cobb and Company, and there is a rack of rifles that have a chain through the trigger guards, and he's going to have to unlock that chain to get one of those rifles. He starts to unlock it, and then he's like, no. Doesn't say anything. He just stops, thinks about it, and there's the whip on the wall, and the legend is about to be born.
Oh, wow.
And I feel like maybe there is some difference because overseas, the Western is often kind of seen as a children's TV genre. Kind of like, okay, this is, our world has moved on from this. This is now a childish thing to celebrate. Kind of wish we in this country had gotten to that point a lot sooner than we did. And I don't want to jump straight to the discussion. I feel like the Western's staying power in North American media plays a big part in the prominence of the gun in our culture. I will have a lot more to say about that in discussion. But overseas, the Western is not revered as much as it is here. It's not taken as seriously as it is here. It's like, okay, well, this was the past. Yeah, that was a thing. Let's not do that anymore. Whereas over here, it's like we keep trying to renegotiate what the Western is. And now, of course, it's become a more contemplative genre because it's also renegotiating elements of our own history, both good and bad. That's good. That's overdue. There's still a lot of shooting going on.
Yeah. There's definitely been some interesting entries into the Western genre in the past 15 years. But they've been more of a critique of that genre than like a
they've been more deconstructive than they have been, oh, hey, we're bringing the Western back.
Yeah.
Okay, the showdown scene at the end, where Cobb is still refusing to pick up a gun, but he is still going to win this fight. That is a huge number of extras in that scene. And that may be another difference between US and UK filming rules or US and Australian filming rules as far as whether or not the extras are part of the union or whether they're just showing up and they're basically day laborers. That was a large number of people compared to what we have been used to with some of these other shows that are much more compact, and it really lent that scene a lot of life. I feel like not having that big crowd of people there to cheer the Denvers brothers getting chased out of town would have lessened that moment, but the fact that you do have this big crowd and they're all like, yeah, get out of here, that's great.
Yeah, that worked really well, and I've got more thoughts that I'll bring up in discussion about the takedown of the Denvers brothers, but watching the crowd laugh them out of town, that was powerful. And normally when you're watching a Western and somebody gets kicked out of town, it's because they got bullets flying at their heels. Yeah,
but these guys got laughed out. Shades of Day of the Dove from season 3 of TOS.
Okay.
All right. Where Kirk and the Klingon captain have to stop fighting and start laughing at this swirly thing alert, to quote Red Dwarf, and chase it off the Enterprise. Otherwise, everyone on the ship, Klingon and human, is going to murder each other. But it's just this presence is floating around in the Enterprise, and kind of like Fox News, just stoking everyone's worst instincts. For the one thing I dislike about the scene where the Denvers are chased out of Bathurst, I dislike this greatly, and this feels like something that came up when you and Shar and I were talking about Wavelin. This dramatic comeuppance gets scored with comedy music. I feel like that robs the scene of a little something.
That's fair.
These guys are dangerous until they get disarmed. If the music is indeed in this 60s mode of telling you what to feel, the music should still be telling you these guys are dangerous until that moment. Actually, it feels like there is a lot to talk about. There is something I failed to mention in my observations because I felt like it really belonged here more. And that is at the end of the show, Tim Perkins he undoes his gun belt, drops the belt, holster, gun, and all on the ground, where it gets trampled into the dust by the whole town. And then Cobb picks it up and shakes his head and just kind of chuckles to himself. I love that image of the discarded gun. This feels like Gene is back and he's got some stuff to get off his chest here. What do you think?
I was all about it. All about it. There's a lot that I really am excited to unpack in this episode today, Earl. This is an extremely Gene Roddenberry episode.
We had some misfires in Wrangler, and I think we kind of pinned some of that on the compressed production schedule. Yeah, possibly them counting on the video workflow happening a lot faster than it was capable of happening in 1960, which compromised the rest of the product. But here, I mean, this is classic Gene. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love the statement of, you know what I really liked about Australia when I first moved here? You didn't have to wear a piece of iron on your hip for people to think you're a man or to take you seriously. I was like, I love that idea that, nobody has anything to prove. You can just show up.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. I have people in my life where I love hanging out with them and spending time with them because I don't have to be anyone but me. I don't have to, as a neurospicy extrovert, I don't have to tone myself down. I don't have to water myself down. I don't have to, put on, mask is the term. I don't have to mask. I don't have to change who I am. I can just show up and I can just be me, and that's okay. And that's the idea that's really coming across to me in this episode.
Yeah, and whether it's a gunfight or a conversation, that really seems to be a distinctly American thing. Yeah, I'm sure you, like myself, have friends overseas who you talk to from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's none of that. I believe we've discussed this in past editions of Gene-ology, where it's like the first question anyone asks you in a conversation in the United States, oh, what do you do? What's your job?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is the most important thing about you. What's your net worth, basically?
Right.
Should I pay less attention to you because you don't make as much money? But I love that Gene is wading into this Second Amendment minefield here, and it really made me wonder. He's doing this on a show that is being produced. It's being bankrolled in the UK. It's being filmed in Australia. The fact that it's coming over to America is kind of an afterthought. Would he have been able to get this through on Have Gun Will Travel or an American Western series? Do you think he would have gotten it through?
I don't think so.
No, I don't either. I don't either.
Too much shoot 'em up, bang, bang.
Yeah, which is obligatory for the American Western. You have three guys walk among these townsfolk with a gun on their hips. That's a major threat. Three guys are able to take over the whole town overnight.
Right.
And maybe there's some middle ground between oh, we have no idea how to prevent this from happening, and everyone should be armed. There's got to be some happy medium in there.
Right. It's interesting, and maybe Earl, because we grew up in the South, most of the folks that I know that are gun owners, they're not guns for the sake of, I want to have a bunch of handguns or AR-15s or whatever. It's, I have hunting rifles because I go hunting. And growing up in an area where, whether you were higher or lower on the economic pecking order, a lot of folks, once deer hunting season start, that was how they would go and put meat in their freezers. It was very much like hunting. I mean, this is as much a part of the food economy in East Tennessee as it is putting out a garden every spring.
Right.
From that standpoint, I'm not as bothered by gun ownership. It's the need to feel like I'm a big man because I'm concealed carry or whatever, or I've got X number of guns. Because
I've got to walk into Subway concealed carrying because I don't feel safe in Subway.
Right.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the New York City Subway. I'm talking about the restaurant.
Yeah. Gotta get my $5 foot long.
And no one is going to stop me.
Right. But it's this need to wear a gun as an assertion of your masculinity.
Yeah.
That's the thing I have issue with. And
when it's insecurity based instead of utility based, you have a problem in the making, and that is what Cobb is trying to prevent from happening in this town. And the script comes out and says that. It puts those words into his mouth.
Right.
And I'm so glad that it does, because that is quite an outlier from other Westerns in 1961.
Mm-hmm. What have we been talking about for forever? Have gun, will travel. I mean, it's right there in the title. There's no getting around it. Here, this is this is not how I'm going to play.
It's absolutely refreshing. I want to home in on this one scene with Mr. Perkins, the postmaster, because if there is a singular scene, were the manifesto of this episode and possibly this whole series. I haven't watched enough of the series outside of Gene's episodes to really see if this is a feature or a bug. Cobb really likes being in Australia because he doesn't have to have a pistol on his hip 24/7. But more to the point, his worry that every man in town is suddenly going to want a gun at their side if a gun is what wins the day. The thinking behind this is that once armed escalation has begun, it's really difficult to back down from.
Right.
And this really has something to say to us in an age where there are ongoing debates about, we should be arming the teachers.
You don't even trust the teacher to teach curriculum. Why you want to give them a gun? As a former educator, this is baffling to me. But anyway.
Cobb makes the even more disturbing point. What does it take to back away from that? And that's the real question for where we are now. Because now that we have had years, if not decades, of a very carefully orchestrated campaign by people who say, oh, yes, we do want to do that because we're also skimming money off of the industries that make these things. Now, how do you back away from a bunch of people having a gun, and a bunch of people having a gun because of insecurity rather than utility? Where in their mind, it is a weapon to enforce their what? They're not using it as a tool. They're not firing a shot into the air to chase coyotes off into the night. They are not in an active combat situation, but they're definitely compensating for something. So, the question is, are we back to the Wild West permanently with no hope of de-escalation? And what will it take to change that? So this was really a shocking message to find in a Western, because normally, especially in an American-made Western, your hero is expected to be packing heat. And here we have a new hero that's like, no, not doing that.
That was the biggest surprise to me. So yes, I knew it was about a guy who was running a stagecoach line. But, you expect he's still going to have some kind of gun on him. Because, yeah, American stagecoach drivers would, have somebody drive and then somebody sitting shotgun with the shotgun. That's why it's called shotgun.
That's where the term came from.
Yeah. So, you anticipate something like that. And that was a very big and very pleasant surprise for me watching this. I'd also really love to zero in on the Denvers brothers. My favorite takedown in here is Chris just walks in and he tells this guy exactly who he is. And the guy is positively infuriated because Chris says, the only reason you came out here is so you can pretend you're a big man because you couldn't keep up in Texas. You are a big fish in a small pond. And, without that piece of iron on your hip, you're nothing. Like, you are just a pathetic little man. And, it doesn't hurt that, Chris is like towering over this guy. But, I mean, man, talk about a verbal kick to the balls.
Yeah, it really is. And he's saying that as if the guy he's saying it to isn't wearing a gun on his hip.
Yeah. Like, he's not at all threatened by that. He's like, nah, I'm going to tell you exactly who you are and, and why you are the way you are. And boy, not everybody enjoys that.
Yeah, not a lot of guys want to be on the receiving end of that speech. But again, Cobb has clocked why that gun is on all the Denver's boys' hips. It's not utility, it's insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Denver's brothers running a protection racket, there are few things that make me angrier than watching the show. And I remember the first time I ever remember watching something that had a protection racket. There was an episode of Gargoyles where one of the recurring gangster villains was running a protection racket, and Elisa has to go undercover to kind of infiltrate and get in his good graces so they can take him down. And that was the first time I ever heard of this. And I remember getting angry. Little 10-year-old me was like infuriated at this injustice of, oh, I'm going to protect you from me as long as you pay me. And I'm like, being positively enraged by this. And those same feelings still show up every time I watch something where there's a protection racket involved. I was like, you are one of the scummiest scumbags to ever scum. Like, I hate this so much. And so watching Chris just like rip this guy a new one without lifting a finger, without his hand on a trigger, I thought that was perfect. It
was delightful.
It was it's so Gene Roddenberry. I loved it.
Cobb knows the only reason that works is because these are the only 3 guys in town with a gun.
Yeah.
There were 2 guys in town with a gun already in Bathurst. There were locals.
Mm-hmm.
They got murdered.
Yeah.
And so the Denver's boys are in charge. But he knows that if he can draw them out one by one, he can take care of them with a freaking boomerang.
That was pretty incredible. I don't know. Are we trying to telegraph this episode of Whiplash is extremely Australian?
The thought occurs, but as long as we don't just descend into all the cliches, it's not suddenly didgeridoo music.
Hey, yeah.
And, we're not like, oh, that's a knife.
Mm-hmm.
As long as we're not doing that stuff. This seemed like, okay, maybe it's a cliche, but it'll still kill you.
That boomerang did not come back connected with a target.
Oh yeah. That boomerang was a permanent installation. So, hey, reckon there's a message in this here episode in Bathurst? I mean, it is in Bathurst. It is an episode. Yeah, kind of like episode at the Bar M. Good description, Gene. Good description. Never mind 1960. What's really amazing is that not only is Gene dropping this conversation starter into a TV show in 1960 or 61, depending on where you lived when it premiered, but it is a Western. A genre of storytelling where, to closely paraphrase Zardoz, the gun is God.
Mm.
Okay, Zardoz said the gun is good, and then followed that up with something else I'm not going to say here. This is really admirably subversive. This is Sneaky Gene at full strength. Well done, sir.
Yeah.
But it really makes me think there's another conversation waiting to happen after the one in this episode about the primacy of the gun in popular culture. You turn on TV, you turn on a movie, you want to instantly convey threat, somebody goes for a gun. Maybe it fires bullets, maybe it's a phaser. The gun is all over our screens. And I think the only thing that could be more on our screens is the wheel. It's that omnipresent. And to a generation of children who are having to stop doing school stuff so they can do active shooter drills, this is sending a message too. Guns not going anywhere. Y'all might, but the guns won't. Your lives are secondary to the gun. It makes me wonder what would happen if we showed less of the gun in our entertainment. When Netflix rolled out the third season of Stranger Things, I remember there was an outcry over how much smoking there was in the show suddenly. Stranger Things really is not an all-ages show, but because there are kids in it, well, some folks are like, hey, kids, gather around, let's watch Stranger Things. It's sort of like the time I introduced my kids to the Goonies without having rewatched it since it came out. This is the first time I'd seen Goonies since 85 or whenever it came out. And I had forgotten that one of the kids blurts out the phrase, what the And then my 4-year-old looked at me with the whole family assembled. Dad, that kid said, what the And I just kind of looked back at him and I said, you did too. And that's when I realized the Goonies isn't really for kids. Not little kids. Neither is Stranger Things. But young people tend to imitate what they see. And so Netflix announced after that outcry they would be reining in how often their shows, which are not bound by the same rules as over-the-air broadcast or basic cable, they would kind of dial back the smoking. Should we look into doing the same thing with how often we show people pulling or firing a gun? Is there still a way to tell stories that way? This episode makes me think maybe there is, or maybe we can limit it. Make it out to be the real threat it is, and not just something everyone should be able to do. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here, and it feels like this episode is the beginning of a conversation and not the end of it. Because it is inviting us to do what Cobb is doing and try to draw a line in the sand somewhere before the sand is too saturated with other people's blood for us to be able to see the line anymore.
Yeah.
There are numerous times in the development of Star Trek The Next Generation that Gene and others pointed out that armed conflict should not be the crux of every single episode or every interaction with any alien culture, because that instant escalation of violence represents a failure of the imagination. Specifically, a failure to imagine that there are still things to talk out and negotiate. Failure to imagine there's a way out that doesn't mean killing or threatening to kill someone. There is a similar message in the Have Gun Will Travel episode, The Great Mojave Chase. But in that show, as you pointed out earlier, Ashley, the name of the show is Have Gun Will Travel. You can't get away from it. And so, episode in Bathurst isn't 100% pacifist because, again, dude got killed with a boomerang. It's not completely bloodless here, but you can see Gene's distaste for violence as the automatic solution to every problem taking shape. And so I feel like if anyone wonders where Gene Roddenberry stood on Second Amendment issues, which were very different in his day than they are now, I feel like he has just put it on the table for us to talk about. And yes, Gene was in the army, and Gene was a policeman. This is a man who has handled weapons and was trained to use them if necessary. And when the people who have that training and that experience and that background, when they are the ones telling us maybe the gun is not the way to go, that's when we need to be listening. So, hooray for the return of Sneaky Gene. I'm so happy. What did you find here, Ashley?
So I had a similar takeaway to what you've said here. Definitely loving this return to Sneaky Gene. What really impressed me in this episode is the way we see Chris handle a bully. He doesn't do it with his fists. Although when forced to, yes, he does defend himself.
He will defend himself. Yeah.
He does so only in self-defense and only, he doesn't try to kill the guy. Like, the only reason, that boomerang connected and it was unfortunate the guy died. But he had tried to avoid it earlier. So there's that. But what really impressed me is the takedown of the Denvers brothers is not through, hitting them or shooting them. The real takedown is that he makes fun of them.
It's the opposite of Megaforce. It's words, not deeds.
Yeah. So, as someone who was frequently bullied, was never hit, but the words were very cruel. As somebody who grew up frequently bullied, I have attempted to live my life in such a way where I will never be the bully. I don't ever want to be the bully. If I am the bully in a situation, I have done it wrong. And I should be reprimanded. But if someone is being a bully, then they need to be told exactly what they are. Because they're being a bully not because they are confident in themselves. They are being a bully because they feel they are lacking in some way and they have to exert themselves upon others in such a way to where they feel like they're in control or that they're okay or this makes them better. And so I kept thinking about a line from Martin Luther that C.S. Lewis opens his book, The Screwtape Letters, with. He says, "The best way to drive out the devil, if he will not yield to texts of Scripture, is to jeer and flout him, for he cannot bear scorn." I think about that line a lot. I think about it in context of some other media that I really love. But I was especially thinking about that in this episode because Chris, when he first approaches the Denvers brothers, he's not wearing a gun, but he completely takes them down with his words. He's like, "You are not a big man. If you were, you would have stayed in Texas. You're a small man coming out to be a big fish in a small pond." And that is so emasculating to him. He's like, "Oh, put on his gun. Give him a gun and I'll show him." Cause he's at least decent enough to not shoot him in cold blood. He doesn't want it to be said of him, "Oh, anything other than self-defense. He fired first." No, he's not going to do that. And his commitment to, I'm not going to harm you in this violent manner until, he's attacked first. That is really, really impressive to me. And then, the final scene, the guys are literally laughed out of town. Mm-hmm. They're like, "Hey, we're going to have a showdown at high noon, but he brought a bullwhip to a gunfight. And it doesn't go quite like Indiana Jones. There, he disarms him, and, well, that's that. He's done. As soon as he doesn't have the gun in his hand, he's nobody. And so he's out of town. And then that wonderful image that you pointed out of the gun belt getting trampled by the crowd. There's a line in the Old Testament, Isaiah 2:4. He will settle disputes among the nations and provide arbitration for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plows and their spears into pruning knives. Nation will not take up sword against nation, and they will never train again for war. I really love this idea of the weapon is getting trampled underfoot by the people because they don't need it. They don't need it. And that idea is really coming through for me here in this episode.
Yeah. Again, I question if this would have ever seen the light of day on American TV. I still think that's a very valid question, because I blame American popular culture of a certain time period for really selling everyone on this idea that the gun needs to be ever present. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that time period has necessarily ended. I think we're still doing it.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair.
And so this isn't just Sneaky Gene. This is radical Sneaky Gene for the day. And I'm here for it.
Special thanks to the Roddenberry Repertory Players. Our cast this week featured Norman Lau as Cobb and Julian Stone as Mr. Perkins. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Facebook at missionlogpod. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is Mission Log Podcast, and Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment.
Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Fazell, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Shabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
On the next Gene-ology, Sarong.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.